Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and here with video 3 of my 2018 Halloween series. I'll have links to the previous 2 videos for those that have missed them. For today's cards, I am using the Whimsy Stamps Frankenstein Schmutz stamp set that I got not too long ago. And I was die cutting a bunch of rectangles using Simon's basic rectangle wafer dies from some Neenah Desert Storm paper. That's what I'm using right here. This is the Neenah 100-pound Desert Storm. Just a really nice craft cardstock. I really like the Neenah Desert Storm. There's an 80-pound and a 100-pound. And I usually just get the 100 because I'll use it for card bases, which I'll do here. So I die cut 2 rectangles from that, and I'm stamping the little Frankenstein's monster onto it with Gina K's Amalgam black ink. After I'd stamped both of these, I was going to kind of leave them as is because there's kind of enough detail. You could just stamp it and go, really. But I wanted to add a bit of color just cuz. So I'm using Copic Markers here. And I've done random videos here and there in the past using Copics on craft cardstock. The biggest thing you need to keep in mind is obviously the colors are not going to look like they do on white cardstock because you have that craft background. So colors going on are going to look different because they're going to look different when the cardstock's wet versus when it dries. Plus, once it's dry, it's just going to have a different tone to it. So I usually keep, when I do craft cardstock, I just keep that in mind. I also keep things pretty simple. I don't do a whole lot of, blending or using a ton of extra markers, etc. just because the craft kind of obscures some of that, which is kind of nice at times if that's the look you're going for. For his skin, I use these 3 different shades of green. I probably could have just used 2, even 1, and really it would have been fine because it's a smaller image. There's all that detail already from like the stamp itself. But I just used my kind of go-to green color combo that I always like and did that for his skin. And then I outlined the image with an E43 marker. I just went with something that was slightly darker than a craft color, just to kind of make it pop a little bit more, because again, this image is really simple. Like most of it's solid, like his whole outfit, etc. is completely solid. So I added that outline just to kind of make him pop that little bit more. And then for the shading, I just used my warm grays. So I did W5, W3, W1, and just kind of blended that out just to ground the image a little bit more. And then added a bit of a cool gray to the bolt in his neck, and then decided to color in the like open areas on his outfit with orange, just to kind of bring in more of the, Halloween color theme, but you could totally leave it. I also did his little Chuck Taylor. That part, I didn't even notice that until I went to color it. It's like he's wearing Chuck Taylors. That's hilarious. So colored those with the orange too, just cuz. And then after I was done coloring, I decided to take my black soot distress oxide ink and sponge this around the edges and just kind of darken it. Normally I wouldn't even do this, but because of the pattern papers I decided to use and just the feel of everything, I was like, I think it'll look nice. Plus I love how the black soot distress oxide ink, how it just goes on paper. There's something about it. I love the smoothness of it. So I just went along, sponging that onto both of these and just kind of deepening it and keeping it fairly soft as well. So I wouldn't touch my blending sponge to the ink pad very often because I don't want any, harsh lines. I just want it to be nice and smooth and blended. And then of all the oxides, this is the hardest one to actually see on my glass mat here, but I just take a baby wipe that down. I always have a dry baby wipe, like rather than toss them, I just keep reusing them to, absorb things and wipe things down, etc. So I did that, and then I took MOWED Lawn Distress Oxide ink to sponge over the pattern papers. And again, I was so happy with how this turned out. On lighter pattern papers, I've done this, in years past, just sponge, usually just regular distress inks or other dye inks. But the nice thing about the oxides is because they have that pigment quality to them is they'll sit more on top of the paper. So with this specific paper, it doesn't matter as much because it's, a lighter paper. But I was curious how this would look on that almost black web pattern paper. And the green shows up really neat. As it dries back a bit. So it's just kind of a deeper green look, but it was still so fun. I don't know. I can keep raving about these on and on. I just really enjoyed playing with these on top of pattern paper. And you definitely wouldn't be able to get like a green dye ink to really show up much at all on anything so dark. So sponge those on, wiped up my mess here on my glass mat. And then I'm going to start kind of figuring out how I'm going to do my layout, since I'm going to do 2 cards, because I have the, these pattern papers are from the Authentique NIGHTFALL 6x6 pack that I showed in the same haul, actually, that I got the stamp set. So that's also why I chose to put these papers with this stamp set. I get asked that a lot too, like what my thought process is. Sometimes it's just happenstance. So I got this paper and stamp set at the same time, so it was kind of forefront in my mind. I was like, these would look good together, I think. So I've got my pattern papers all die cut, a couple of them sponged there, my main image colored and sponged, and then I also stamped the little party hat that's in this stamp set. I stamped that onto a scrap of this Neenah Desert Storm cardstock with carved pumpkin Distress Oxide ink. And then I just took my orange, that same orange Copic marker I used on his outfit. I just used that and filled in the open stripes on the hat just to kind of tie it all together. And then I'm just going to fussy cut this out with my scissors, because I decided one card would be Halloween and then the other one would be kind of Halloween-ish, but a birthday card. Just because this stamp set has some really good Halloween and birthday sentiments. It technically could almost be like an all year round sort of card, just depending on the sentiments you use with it. So cut that out. And then for all my sentiments, I die cut some black cardstock with the new Simon Says stamp, the Sentiment Labels wafer die. And I think I said this in my last video. This is another one of those die sets that went totally under my radar. When I first saw it, I was like, you know, that's nice. Like, I'm sure it'll be useful. And already I'm finding I'm reaching for it all the time. Like, if you have trouble, you know, cutting strips of cardstock and they're crooked or whatever, or when you like stamp and emboss sentiments, etc., and then you want to trim them down and then you trim it crooked, these are a must-have. I don't have a problem per se with, you know, getting straight cuts, but I just sometimes get frustrated when I have multiple sentiments to do and trying to get everything, you know, lined up and trim them down, and it takes so long. And I was like, so I die cut these first and then stamped on them, and it just saved me a ton of time. It was so much more convenient. So I'm stamping sentiments onto this black cardstock strip with Ink on 3's Juicy Embossing ink. I used my anti-static powder tool, was stamping the sentiments, and then I embossed the main part, so the happies and then the Halloween and the birthday. I'm embossing with Simon Says Stamps Detail White embossing powder. And they just all happened to fit on this one strip, so it just worked. And then I'm just going to cut them apart with my scissors. Like, no problem. You could also use your paper trimmer just to cut them apart. And then for the remaining sentiments, I'm going to use the Wendy Vecchi Leaf Green embossing powder that I also used in my last video, that I'm kind of obsessed with her color embossing powders now. And the green is perfect for Halloween, of course. So I stamped the Franken word with the Ink on 3 Juicy Embossing ink, and then I'm going to use the leaf green to heat emboss these on another cardstock strip. And then once I have those embossed, off camera, I end up stamping and embossing the remaining sentiments from the set that I'm going to use to kind of finish off my cards. So the largest rectangle here, I die cut with the largest of the Simon Basic Rectangle dies from the pattern paper. So this is A2 size. So this is going to completely cover my card bases, which is that Neenah Desert Storm 100-pound cardstock. And I'm going to adhere those into place with my Xyron Mega Runner, and then adhere my main image to the next piece of pattern paper. And then I'm going to pop this up with a little bit of Simon's foam tape. Just thinner foam tape to give it a little bit of extra dimension so everything's not completely flat, but also not super crazy dimensional, since I got a lot going on with the pattern papers and the sponging and whatnot. So I'm just going to cover the back of this with these strips of foam tape, peel off the backing, and then pop that onto my card. And I've said this a lot, I always have a really hard time. I'm very linear with how I think and how I lay things out. I like things straight. I like things lined up. So it's always a lot more difficult for me to put things on an angle, make them crooked on purpose, etc. But I did. I nearly pressed this down, and then I was like, oh, tilted it, and then put it down. It's like, oh, look at me, you know, thinking outside the box. But yeah, it is difficult for me sometimes. I literally have to stop and think about it to do things crooked on purpose. But Halloween stuff, I like. That's another reason why I like making Halloween cards so much, is you can be a little messier with them. You can make more of a mess. Things can be a little bit more sloppy or, you know, imperfect, and it just works with the whole theme. So as a final little embellishment to this guy, I wasn't originally going to add any highlights to him at all. But I pulled out my white Prismacolor pencil. I didn't want to use my gel pen because that would have been too harsh in my opinion. I just wanted it subtle. And I used the Prismacolor pencil to fill in his eyes just to whiten them a bit since it was craft cardstock. And then I also used it to add some, you know, very light, subtle highlights to this little Frankenstein's monster here. Just gave it that little extra something without being, you know, bright, my go-to bright white gel pen type highlights. So I just went along, added a few highlights after filling in his eyes, and I did that to both images, and I also added a little highlight to the birthday hat on the second card. And then those remaining sentiments that I had stamped and heat embossed, I either adhered to each card front, and then the remaining ones I'm going to adhere to the insides. So the Happy Franken Halloween for the one card, and then the card on the left says Happy Franken Birthday, and then on the inside I heat embossed the sentiment that says we'd need a bolt of lightning. We'd need a bolt of lightning for that many candles. And then I stamped the little cloud and lightning bolt set above that on the inside of the card. And then I just filled in the cloud with that white Prismacolor pencil. Again, just as a subtle touch, but it just kind of finishes it off. So as a last step for these cards, I pulled out my Nouveau Glitter Drops in Sunlit Meadow. I thought the name was kind of funny because the theme of the cards I'm making. And yeah, so Sunlit Meadow, but it was a perfect shade of like green. And it's got that little bit of glitter in it. So it goes on kind of cloudy. But once they're completely dry, which I'll show at the end here, it's like the perfect shade of green. So I just squeeze those on. I always kind of do a little swirl as I lift the bottle away and I stop squeezing just to help smooth them out. And then to smooth them out fully, I'm going to tap these just on, you can tap them on your work surface. I like tapping them on like a higher object like this embossing container here. So I just gently tap my card base on it and it helps kind of smooth out and flatten out the Nouveau drops a little bit. And then I set these aside and let them dry for 24 hours and they're good to go. So that was today's Halloween cards. Like I said, I'll have links below the video to my blog post. I'll have links to all the supplies used. I'll have links to the other 2 Halloween videos. Stay tuned. There will be more Halloween, more Christmas, like tons. I have tons of videos coming over forever basically, so just stay tuned. Thank you so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting on my videos. I really appreciate it, and I will see you all very soon in the next one. Bye.